You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast, hosted by Zach Bechtold and Matt Franks. If you'd like to learn more about the Bearded Theologians, you can go online at beardedtheologians.com, where we have past podcasts, blogs, and a couple items for sale. So check us out, beardedtheologians.com. Thank you for listening, and enjoy this week's show. You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast, hosted by Matt Franks
and Zach Bechtold.
So, obviously, with the first of the year, one of the things that we tend to talk about in the lectionary cycle of the church and the church calendar is baptism of the Lord Sunday, and this is the day. This baptism of the Lord Sunday. If you're preaching that, if that's what you do, if not, we're going to have a conversation about baptism this week on the Bearded Theologians. And so, Zach, start us off with your ideas and thoughts on baptism.
Sure. I'm sure we have the same conversation every year because there's a lot with baptism, but there's not a lot with baptism, right? Once you kind of get there, it's there. And I love this time of year because it is baptism of the Lord Sunday, and we go from birth into that baptism, and we kind of let Jesus get to work in a sense. But it's, for me, I think the importance of this Sunday and looking at baptism is the reminder that each and every one of us is called to live out our baptism in this world. And Jesus gives the prime example of that. It's not, Jesus' ministry starts with, do the things I'm doing. Here's how you do it. And it's very much Jesus does not operate in the do as I say, not as I do. It is do as I do, and is consistent in living that out. And I don't think for us as people that baptism starts our ministries. I don't think it started Jesus's, but it's a nice starting point in our Gospels to that, right? But I think for us, it's that reminder to live into it, rather than baptism is simply something we do or something that changes our lives or something different. It is that affirmation for us of our faith and the affirmation for us to go and live that out. And the beauty of baptism of the Lord Sunday is we get to remember that with Christ. And oftentimes, or hopefully oftentimes, we are fortunate enough to baptize somebody on that Sunday, whether it's a child or an adult or whomever. And then we get to remember our baptisms together. We get to covenant with one another and be in community in this baptism, and just remind ourselves of, oh yeah, this is who we're called to be all the time, but especially in this new year as we begin to move forward in our ministries and our day-to-day lives and the ways that we share Christ's love and grace with all people. I think it's a pretty appropriate time throughout the year, at the beginning of the year, to remember that and move forward.
So, you talk about the idea of the remembrance, and so, we're living in a culture that's increasingly non-Christian and not connected to this. And so, one of the things that I always like to talk about, not only a sense of remembering our baptism, because a lot of people, if they were baptized as an infant, don't remember it, because a lot of them were baptized before the YouTubes and all the things that we do now to remember those things. And my kids were even on the cusp of pictures being used, taking a picture or video of the church. And so we don't really have that memory of that, but we love to share their story about that. And we do have one picture. One of my favorite pictures is of my mom. And so one of my favorite pictures of my mom is when I'm holding my youngest, Emily, and we're baptizing her on Easter. And I'm holding her, and my mom's looking over my shoulder, and that's one of my favorite pictures. That's something I always like to tell. I always like to remind my daughter that. I always love to remind my daughter that it was because of her that it wasn't because of her, but we started a tradition at that church of baptizing people on Easter. And then also in my ministry, every year, with the exception of 1 year, I've baptized someone on Easter. and it was because of just how sacred and special, cool moment that really was a part of that service and on Easter. And I know it's a tradition, one of the traditions of the church to do that. And I mean, it's a powerful moment if you can have that experience. And I know sometimes in worship, what's kind of become a trend is just to have a baptism Sunday where you bring everybody to do it on one Sunday, and that's not a bad deal too. But I think if you can do it at different times throughout the year, it kind of can set that spark throughout your whole congregation. Not only to remember your baptism, but the role of the congregation in the baptism, of like, we agree to take care of this person and uplift them and hold them in our prayers. And to me, that's really, I love this Sunday because it reminds us of our call to that. And then it also reminds us that, hey, like, we still have work to be done, that Jesus, and that's always a good segue, is that, from this point on, in most of the gospel readings, when Jesus is baptized, he instantly goes to the next thing. I mean, it's pretty instantaneously. And so we have the same thing. Oh, we're baptized, we instantaneously go to the same thing. I mean, I just celebrated, last year was my 20th anniversary of my baptism. And I was baptized on Halloween, and I'll always remember that. I mean, I was kind of baptized on Halloween, but then, like, that evening was a fall festival, and so of course I showed up as Darth Maul, and it's fitting for someone who was recently baptized to look like the devil. It just works. But I think with baptism, um, it is one of the coolest things to experience as the pastor when you're holding, like, especially as a child, and you're like, doing that, or as an adult. Like, I did a river baptism this year, and with, this is the first time I'd ever done that, and that was just cool in its own right, until I fell in the river and panicked a little bit. But it was still a great memory. And so, Zach, as we think about this, like, the Methodist Church has definitely a definitive statement on it, and you can find that on their website, and we'll link that. They have the by water and the Spirit and the meaning of baptism documents that you can read. And what are some other things that come to mind when you think of baptism?
Well, I the thing about it is it's community, right? We baptize in community. We baptize with a cloud of witnesses, right? Whether both physical and spiritual. I very much regard baptism in the same way that we do communion. That it is done with the great cloud of witnesses, all that have gone before us are with us in those moments. And yeah, it is special to do baptisms on Baptismal Lord Sunday, on Easter, on Christmas Eve. Whenever they the high holy holidays, right? But there's something about when somebody comes up in the middle of the year and says, "Hey, I'd love to do this. We'd love to have our child baptized," because they're going at it at their own time. They're making that and not to say that folks that get baptized at Easter and this Sunday aren't. There's a lot of thought that goes into it, but it's just something special when we can remember that throughout the year, and bring people together, whether it's spur of the moment, whether it's planned out, whatever it is, to remember that together. And I love the physical touch of water and having people place their hand in the water to be blessed, with the sign of the cross, a lot like we do on Ash Wednesday. I've done those services. They're great moments for people to remember, to reaffirm, to be in that place once again, especially if they were baptized as an infant or baptized at a time where they just don't remember anymore. The physical presence of that, and to give people something tangible to hold on to once again and say, "Oh yeah, here I am. Here's who God's calling me to be. Here's who God's calling us to be as a community and as the body of Christ together." And it's not linear, singular moments, but it's this journey of faith, this process that we're in, that add up to make what it is we're called to. And so I think for me, that's a lot of what it is. You talked about our doctrine, and we only baptize once. We won't rebaptize you. And I think that's important. as people and as families and children and people come of, hey, this is what this means, and here's why it's important, but here's what you're not missing out on if you baptize your child. Because that's usually the question. Well, if I baptize my child, what happens when they're 13 or 16 and they want to be baptized again? Well, here's what we do. Here's what it means.
Or they become a little heathen, and because that's what happens when you become a teenager. Is
Right.
Both of us that are having preteen, we're really questioning maybe we need to dunk them back in the water again. And I think that remembrance is key. I think that, I was thinking today, like for our children's moment on Sunday, it'd be really cool to have the kids stand around the font and talk about that, and let them touch the water and say, most of you have been baptized, because most of them that come to children's moment have been baptized, right, either by myself or they were done before I got here. And I think that's helping them remember. I think far too often we forget to help people remember, and I think that's key as well.
Well, it's telling a piece of our history, right? Something that we have lost in our culture, especially in the South and in places in communities that have been established for a long time. Where I live here now, the community still, it's 120 years old. People homesteaded here 120 years ago, right? People's grandparents homesteaded here. People's parents homesteaded here. And so that history of coming over from wherever they came over from, of homesteading, of doing all of this, their history is still there, and they're still telling that history. So many families and people have lost that cultural history of where we come from, and we don't tell the story well. And remembering our baptism allows us to tell that story once again for ourselves, for our families, for our kids, and for and with each other of, here's my story, here's where I come from. And it allows us to remember that history and to continue to live in and with that, rather than just, oh, it was something I did, or I don't know, which is so much of what our culture does today of, I don't know where my people came from,
Well, and I don't know, the big thing too is not only just a remembrance, but the just that community just becomes so powerful, and I think that's key. And so
it's because there's something we share in common, right? We're of all of the things that divide us, that can divide us in our opinion, thoughts and theologies and politics and whatever, baptism is one of those things that brings us together in common ground to say we start here.
And maybe that's if you've got questions about baptism, maybe you're not familiar with it, maybe you've been attending a church and you're not for sure what their baptism deals are, ask your pastor, and ask them how do they feel about baptism, and what are their thoughts on baptism. Or if you don't attend, or you're not part of the faith community, on our website at beardedtheologians.com, we will share the resources that are available for us to share from the denomination. They're pretty good resources, and very thought out, sound theological resources to share about baptism, and encourage you to look at those, because maybe you've been a lifelong Methodist and you never knew what those were. And it'd be a good opportunity for you to bone up on your understanding of baptism, because you never know when in a trivia contest that question may come up and you may have to answer to something. What is the meaning of baptism? Is it A, repentance, B, something, C, something else? So with that in mind, we want to encourage you to go to our website at beardedtheologians.com, check out all of our past Beardcast and blog posts, and pick up a couple of items for Valentine's Day is coming up, and for your special bearded loved one. It would look good to have either a Bearded Theologian shirt, hat, or whatever else you want to buy them. Feel free to pick up something for your family. And so with that in mind, with the Bearded Theologians, I'm Matt Franks.
I'm Zach Bechtold. Thanks for checking us out.
Thank you for listening to the Bearded Theologians Beardcast. If you'd like to learn more about the Bearded Theologians or look at our other content, go online at beardedtheologians.com. And also don't forget to pick up one of those beautiful coffee mugs or t-shirts that we have on our website as well.